Hey, what's going on, gang? This is Nate on the Stone, and welcome to the 22nd episode of The Rolling Stone. This is where I give my initial thoughts and reactions to stories that are currently making their way through the news cycle. And we have to start off this episode of The Rolling Stone in San Francisco, where the board of directors of the city of San Francisco actually this week declared the NRA, the National Rifle Association, as a domestic terror organization. Okay, so August 31st, there was another mass shooting in Odessa, Texas. Okay, 7 people were killed. It's another tragedy, and it's just, another reason that there is something wrong in the United States. Okay, that there have been an increase, right, in mass shootings. Definitely much more today than there were in the past. Now, the problem is that so many people on the left want to blame guns, right? They say that the problem is guns, and that if we just had more gun control laws, if we just, made it much harder for people to get guns, then these sort of attacks, these sort of tragedies wouldn't happen. Well, the city of San Francisco went a step further, and they declare that the NRA, the National Rifle Association, is in fact a domestic terror group. They did it very officially. They put out a resolution and everything. And I'm not going to read the whole resolution to you because that would take too long, but I will link to it in the description box, so if you want, you can go and read the whole thing, which I highly suggest you do. It's a very good insight into this growing mindset. But I'm going to read just a few bullet points from the resolution, okay? So it starts off thus. Whereas the United States is plagued by an epidemic of gun violence, including over 36,000 deaths and 100,000 injuries each year, and whereas every day approximately 100 Americans are killed with guns, and whereas there have been more than 1 mass shooting per day in the United States in 2019, and whereas the gun homicide rate in the United States is 25 times higher than any other high-income country in the world, and whereas our elected representatives, including the President, have taken an oath swearing to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, whereas the United States Declaration of Independence declare that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are unalienable rights, and whereas the United States Constitution specifically delineates that the country was founded to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, and promote the general welfare, and whereas the National Rifle Association musters its considerable wealth and organizational strength to promote gun ownership and incite gun owners to acts of violence, and whereas the National Rifle Association spreads propaganda that misinforms and aims to deceive the public about the dangers of gun violence, and whereas the National Rifle Association through its advocacy has armed those individuals who wouldn't have committed acts of terrorism, resolved that the City and County of San Francisco intends to declare the National Rifle Association a domestic terrorist organization, and be it further resolved that the City and County of San Francisco should take every reasonable step to assess the financial and contractual relationships our vendors and contractors have with this domestic terrorist organization. Now again, that is not the whole resolution. Didn't read the whole thing, just wanted to highlight those things that I thought were the most interesting. Now, the first problem we have is that there are several of the points that the resolution uses to justify what it's doing have no basis in fact whatsoever. So, for example, the point that there have been more mass shootings than days in 2019. That number actually comes from the Gun Violence Archive. It's a gun control advocacy group that actually records mass shootings in the United States. And I talked about this a bit in the video I did about the rise of white supremacy, so I'm going to repeat myself a little bit here. It's true that the Gun Violence Archive, in their calculations of mass shootings for 2019, it does record that there have been more mass shootings than days in 2019. But the way that they get there is very, very revealing, okay? There is no dictionary definition of a mass shooting. There is no agreed upon dictionary definition of what a mass shooting is. So, Congress, most law enforcement agencies like the FBI, they define a mass shooting as where a perpetrator shoots and kills 4 or more people in an attack. Okay, that constitutes a mass shooting. The Gun Violence Archive, however, does things a little differently. They define a mass shooting very differently. By their definition, a mass shooting is where a perpetrator just shoots 4 or more people, okay? Doesn't have to kill them, just has to wound them. And that's why if you actually go to their website and you're looking at the list of mass shootings, for example, this year, you're going to see several examples of where it says, 4, 5, 6, 7 people wounded, but no one was killed. In fact, there are 129 cases, I believe, on the Gun Violence Archive website, last I looked, where people were shot, but they were not killed. Now, again, these attacks are heinous in and of themselves, and these people are, it's a tragedy that these people were shot and wounded, but they were not killed, and so therefore most law enforcement bodies and Congress, the U.S. Congress, they're not going to define these as a mass shooting. The way that the Gun Violence Archive defines a mass shooting really allows them to widen the net, and so they can, say that there are more mass shootings than days in 2019. So that's number one. The second point that the resolution makes that I really take umbrage at and that I really wanted to hone in on here is where they say that the U.S. gun homicide rate is higher than any other, high-income nation in the world. Now that is disingenuous because Ryan McMacken over at the Mises Institute in 2017, he made a very compelling point that there really is no such thing as a U.S. homicide rate. He said, population, cultures within the different states. The states themselves, the 50 states, they are so diverse with different people, different histories, different customs, etc., that you really can't average all of the homicide rates, of the different states and come to an overall homicide rate for the United States. It doesn't make any sense because some states, like New Hampshire, the Mises organization said, like New Hampshire, their homicide rate was 1.3 per 100,000 people. Okay, New Hampshire has a very, very low homicide rate. A state like Mississippi, however, the homicide rate is 11 per 100,000 people. Okay? Wide variation in that. And in fact, it is very interesting. When McMacken at the Mises Institute, Mises organization, when he broke down the data, you get a very interesting picture. So, if you think, that more gun laws are actually going to lower homicide rates, they're going to work to lower this this growing trend of mass shootings, right? You would expect that guns with more gun control laws would have lower homicide rates, right? Well, not exactly, according to this data, because Illinois, which has a population of about 11.8 million and has some very strict gun control laws, Illinois is actually number 5. It is the state with the 5th highest homicide rate. Okay, Texas, on the other hand, which has concealed carry, and it has a much bigger population. It has 28 million people, so more population, looser gun control laws. Texas was only number 24. Okay, in the homicide rates of the state. Right? It was only number 24 in this list. So even though with a bigger population and less gun control laws, Texas actually has less murders than a state like Illinois, a state with a lower population and more gun control laws. So once again, it's disingenuous to say that the American homicide rate is so much higher than any other organization, again, because you're not actually breaking down the data into the different states, which vary wildly state by state, and the implication that this higher crime rate, this higher homicide rate, is because of less gun control is torn apart by the fact that states with good gun control laws like Illinois are not necessarily at the bottom of, are the states with the least number of homicides. That doesn't always hold true. Some states are. New York, according to this data from 2017, had a very low homicide rate. And New York has some stringent gun control laws, especially in New York City. It's at the bottom of the list, but that's not a tried and true rule. Again, like I said, with the case of Illinois, etc. So there we go. That's the first thing I wanted to say, that the data that the city of San Francisco uses to justify defining or designating the National Rifle Association as a domestic terror organization, it's disingenuous, okay? The data that they use might not be 100% incorrect, but it is used so disingenuously to push what the city of San Francisco wants to accomplish that it is basically useless and dishonest to use that information. And the second thing that I have to say about this story is that it is rather ironic for the city of San Francisco to place themselves as the defenders of the Constitution, because where that bullet point where they said it's the job of the president and public officials to protect and defend the Constitution, as if hey, you guys aren't doing your job, we're going to take charge and actually defend the Constitution. The Constitution, through the Second Amendment, also guarantees the right to bear arms. So you can make the argument that by not pushing for more gun control, that's going to make it harder for law-abiding citizens to actually purchase a gun. These people are defending the Constitution, and you're not. The city of San Francisco is not defending the Constitution. So that's an irony. But the really big point that I wanted to make here in regards to this resolution is the fact that this is a huge example of what has been called the cancel culture, or what I like to call political excommunication. Because think about it like this. What is the NRA? What is the National Rifle Association? Well, it is, an organization that promotes and defends and fights for the Second Amendment. And it is true that not every single gun owner in the United States is a member of the NRA. But ostensibly, the NRA speaks for every single person who owns a weapon lawfully and who, defends and supports the Second Amendment, right? That is that is the NRA. They take it upon themselves to speak for all gun owners and everyone who promotes and defends the Second Amendment. So when the city of San Francisco says that the NRA is a domestic terror organization, what they are actually implying is that every single person, every single private citizen like you and me, who exercises our constitutional right to lawfully own a weapon, is a terrorist, or at the very least, we are sympathetic, right? We associate ourselves with a terrorist organization. Now, of course, what's the thing about a terrorist organization? A terrorist organization is even worse, right, than, for example, a racist group, right? The KKK doesn't go around burning crosses in people's yards anymore, usually. In fact, the KKK is pretty much a joke, right? Now, they are still racists, however, which means that they are still, some of the scum of the earth. But a terrorist organization is even worse than the modern joke that is the modern KKK, because a terrorist organization, by its very definition, kills people, right? Kills innocent people in order to accomplish its goals. So, by simply owning a weapon, by simply defending the Second Amendment, right? If that alone makes you an accomplice of a terrorist organization, or if that makes you an associate of a terrorist organization, or if that makes you sympathetic to a terrorist organization, what they are saying, what the city of San Francisco is saying, is that not only do you have no place in modern society, but you are the enemy of modern society. You, Mr. Average, American citizen who went out, followed the law, exercised their Second Amendment right, and bought a handgun or a rifle or whatever, whether for whatever reason, right? Whether it's for hunting, whether it's for self-defense, right? Whether it's for your wife to protect herself when you're off on a trip, whatever. You are a terrorist. You, or at the very least, you are an ally and a sympathizer of terrorism. And of course, we can't tolerate terrorism in our society. And therefore, you are the enemy, right? And this is, like I said, this is a huge example of political excommunication, because when you do something like this, there is absolutely no room at all for free speech to work. There's absolutely no room at all for people to sit down and argue about these different positions, right? The U.S. Army didn't hunt down Osama bin Laden so that they could sit down, and discuss, their different ideologies and worldviews, right? No, because bin Laden was a terrorist, and so the mission was to find him, track him down, and kill him. They're doing the same thing here, maybe not to that extent yet, where the goal is to find, hunt, and kill and destroy you. Well, kill you, because the goal ultimately is to destroy you. That's what they're doing by designating the NRA, and thus everyone who is even remotely associated with the NRA or the Second Amendment, as a terrorist. It is to exclude you from political society. It's so that you can't even participate in political society. Free speech doesn't work if you aren't part of a political society, right? So this is their kind of ace in the hole. If we designate this as a terrorist group, we automatically make you the enemy. That is what is happening. The woke people who run San Francisco, they have declared you to be a terrorist just for owning a gun, just for following the law and exercising your constitutional right to own a gun. And that really shows where we are today in the 21st century America, where it has come this far. Free speech has dissolved so much, and we can no longer stand the sight of each other so much that now if you disagree with someone on the issue of guns, you are potentially a terrorist, which means that you can't participate in society, which means that you have no right to participate in society, because you are just a bloodthirsty killer that wants to kill innocent people in order to advance your agenda, right? That is huge. So even though a lot of news sources were saying that this resolution is toothless, it is still very important, very hugely important, shows us exactly where we are today in the 21st century America. But anyway, that is story number one. Our second story for this video of the Rolling Stone comes to us from Vice News, okay? So, Vice News earlier this week reported that Pennsylvania was going to become the 12th state that was actually revamping, okay, its quote-unquote gender markers. So, driver's license, birth certificates, they're going to say that you're either male or female, right? Well, now, 12 states now that Pennsylvania has joined this club, they are going to add the moniker X, okay? So if you're not a man, you're not a woman, you can just choose X, which, covers a whole lot of ground, okay? Because according to the postmodern sexual gender, identity ideology, there are a lot of genders that can be filed under non-binary, right? Like Jewid-Flender, gender fluid, gender queer, asexual, bigender, etc., etc., etc. So, Vice News, they actually interviewed, or they asked 7 different non-binary people what this meant to them, what this meant, being able to choose X instead of masculine or feminine. And these were some of the responses that Vice got, okay? Jackie Colquitt, age 22. She said, "When I changed my gender marker, I was finally able to openly proclaim how I see myself and how I want the world to see me. And this marked the beginning of these perspectives being synonymous. I felt validated in such a specific and monumental way, and it made me feel free." Chandler Rose, also age 22. She said, "I'm really happy that I changed my gender marker because it was mostly about me being authentic and honest with myself and the world." Aiden Hill, age 26. He said, "It has meant the world to me. I feel like the state sees my human complexity rather than just a barcode, like I can be seen as a third gender rather than asked to fill a binary because of what is in my pants. I've suffered much less overt discrimination since the gender marker X has made it into the national press," unquote. Now, just a few things. First of all, this is the rewriting of history taken to its logical conclusion. If you watched my last On the Stone vid about the 1619 Project, you'll know that I spent some time saying that, we form our identities through intellectual endeavors, experiences, but also by going back to our roots, whether that's our family history, whether that's the history of our community, or whether that is our the history of our country, knowing from who we came from, where we came from, the ideas that formed the environment and the society that we live in today. All of that, right, comes into our identity, right? And when you get rid of all those things, you replace all those things, you get rid of all the tools by which you can actually form your own identity, right? We talked about, that was the whole thing, about the rewriting of history and that changing identity. Well, what is this? Except that, like the 1619 Project, except in microcosm. And this is actually the end goal of the rewriting of history. Being able to rewrite your entire lived experience. Basically being able to rewrite your entire existence. Because before, right, because of probably white supremacist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic doctors, patriarchal doctors, you were, quote unquote, assigned a gender at birth, because there is no such thing as biological sex anymore. Sex is now assigned at birth without your consent, without your approval, making it tyrannical according to the sexual ideologues of today, right? So, if you can actually just completely ignore your physiology, your chromosomes, which, say that you are a man or a woman, what is that but being able to completely rewrite your own existence? And especially, particularly when, think of this, gang, you do not have to undergo any sort of surgery or treatment in order to do this, right? Because again, it's not just for men who feel like women, women who feel like men, and then, go and get surgery and either, load up on estrogen or testosterone in order to, try and look the part of how they feel. No. All that is required here is just a feeling, first of all, of being a man or a woman, or something completely different. It doesn't have to be a man or a woman. And then all that is required for X to be made your gender marker on things like your driver's licenses and your birth certificate is just to pick up and fill out a form from your county or your state, send it in to the right department, and then they'll basically say, okay, our records have been updated, you are no longer a man, you are now, X, and they'll give you a new driver's license, a new birth certificate, etc., in order to promote that idea, in order to basically to validate your own feelings. That's what they're going to do, if we can just be blunt about it. So that is the ultimate form of rewriting history, being able to rewrite your entire existence. That is huge. That is social Frankensteinism right then and there. That is terrifying in and of itself, where just, go through a bureaucratic process and shazam, you're no longer a man. You are just X, which again can, mean multiple different things. But there's something even worse than that, okay? Something even more terrifying that this story underlays. And I'm going to say something a little bit controversial here, gang, so be warned. Because what is it that societies or civilizations need in order to survive? Okay, not just thrive, but survive. And a lot of people are probably going to say, freedom or liberty or something like that. And as important and as good as those things are, freedom and liberty, that's not what's necessary. What is necessary above anything else is order, okay? You can't have a civilization or a society exist or continue to exist if it is being torn apart by chaos. It can't happen. So you have to have some system of order in there for a society to actually get its bearing, to stand up on its own 2 feet, and to actually start progressing forward. Now, what is one of the ways in which societies and civilizations can get order? It's through the law, right? The law actually acts as the boundaries of our actions, right? So if our neighbor accidentally, runs over our kitten because he's speeding on his way to work, or for something more mundane, if he's barbecuing in the backyard and he's got the music up too high and we are just at the end of our tether, it's been a long day at work and the baby's crying, and the wife is on, her time of the month and everything, and we just decide the heck with it and we grab, an axe and try to Lizzie Borden our neighbor because we just can't take it anymore, right? The law acts as a barrier so that we don't do that, so that we can actually, if not live in peace, then at least we can live in tolerance of each other, and we're not actually tearing society apart with our own personal acts of chaos. That's what the law is for. Now, what is law? That's the next question. And for my money, the best definition of law is still the definition that Cicero, the ancient Roman senator, gave it all the way back in ancient times. And that is the law. Good law is right reason aligned with nature. So basically, to break that down, it is thinking correctly about reality, about what is. That is the law. Now, how does something like this, right, adding an X gender marker, how does that pervert the law and therefore pervert order? It does it because it is saying now that your gender, what you are, okay, I'm not going to, what you are is based solely on your own point of view, your own subjective belief and your own subjective feelings. Never mind, hard facts like biology, physiology, anatomy, genetics, etc. That doesn't mean anything. In other words, reality might be saying one thing, but you might be feeling or thinking something else. So it is the feeling and thinking now that actually determines what you are. That determines your essence and your existence. And the law is actually promoting this. The law is now promoting subjectivity, and it is promoting, subjective feelings and emotions and desires and wishes rather than what actually is. And now, take it a step further and remember that this X gender marker, it can stand for a whole host of different things. Because non-binary covers a lot of different genders. I have been finding out in research it can cover bigender, gender fluid, gender queer, agender, so many different things, because non-binary just means you don't feel like a man or a woman. Well, there are tons now of different gender identities that actually fit that bill. So you say X, you can be saying that you are any number of anything, okay? That is personal chaos. That is personal chaos, not only because it can change on the turn of a dime, because, feelings come and go, desires and wishes come and go. Not only that, but also because, again, nature, reality, is being completely tossed out the window in order for what we want. What is being tossed out of what we want. And the law, for as long as good law has existed, the law has always been the opposite. What you want is not necessarily what the law is going to allow you. Because, hey, I want, to shoot my neighbor's dog because it's an annoying little thing, or I want, to be able to dump my garbage into the lake, that is actually, off of my property, because it is easier than to actually take it to the landfill down the road. I want to do that. But the law says that is not reality. That is not good. That is not, aligning with reality as we know it to be. Therefore, what is and what is right is going to take precedence over what you want. That is what the law's goal is. That's how we have order. But now, if what we want, which, can change on a week-to-week basis, if that is now going to be the definition and the defining aspect of what we are, and if the law is going to actually promote that, then the law is actually promoting chaos. And you can't have a civilization with chaos. The law is actually being perverted from its original goal in order simply to advance an agenda and an ideology. Okay, so that is story number 2. And our third and final story for this episode of the Rolling Stone takes us to Tennessee, where poor Harry Potter has been put into the hairline target again. So, a Catholic school in Tennessee, Nashville, Tennessee, St. Edward Catholic School, it declared that it will no longer allow its kindergarten through 8th grade students to check out the Harry Potter books. And in fact, they have gotten rid of the Harry Potter books from their school library, okay? This was a decision that was made by the pastor of St. Edward's Catholic Church, okay? The parish that is attached to the school itself. Father Dan Rehill, okay? And Father Rehill said this. He sent out an email to, all parties involved in this decision, and he gave out a general email to the parish, right? And this is what he said. This is what he said to justify this decision. Quote, "These books present magic as both good and evil, which is not true, but in fact a clever deception. The curses and spells used in the book are actual curses and spells, which when read by a human being risk conjuring evil spirits into the presence of the person reading the text." Unquote. And Father Rehill went further and he said that he had actually consulted a number of exorcists, right, before he had made this decision. Neat little side fact, Catholic trivia, is that each diocese actually has its own professional exorcist. Okay, because some of the things that you see in some of those spooky movies, they actually do happen, and there are actually real life exorcists, priests, who are actually charged with actually, getting rid of that sort of stuff. That's your Catholic trivia for this week. Now, to get back to the story, there are 2 different ways of looking at this story, okay? The first one is just to kind of throw up your hands and just kind of say, oh my God, aren't we past this, right? Because when Harry Potter was first published in 1997, and then when the first movie came out in 2001, I believe it was. I think it was 2001 because it was the same year as Fellowship of the Ring. So many people. There were a lot of people who said that the books and the movies were a bad influence on kids because of the way that they portrayed magic, or just because they had magic in them themselves. And a lot of people, myself included, pointed out that, hey, you know what? We grew up with Harry Potter. We read the books. We watched the movies, right? We didn't lose our faith. We weren't trying to cast spells in our room. We didn't, try and find a spell book on the internet or at a bookstore and, try and get revenge on our enemies or anything like that. Right? And so you can say, the books are harmless. The magic is just, because you're going to have magic in a fantasy world. And so you're making a mountain out of a molehill, and you might even actually be pushing kids away from you, because since Harry Potter is still everywhere, it runs a serious risk of actually overstaying its welcome, like some other franchises I could mention, like say Star Wars, Pirates of the Caribbean. But because Harry Potter is still in the limelight with new movies coming out and new materials and everything, kids know about Harry Potter. And so if they're not allowed to read Harry Potter, they're going to see it as an act of rebellion to actually get their hands on Harry Potter and to actually read it. And then, they're going to start asking potentially, what's so bad about it? Why should I listen to you? There was nothing in this book when I read it that was bad, so you just don't want me to have any fun, right? The old stereotype of the Catholic or the Christian in general who just, doesn't want people to have fun, right? The fear that someone somewhere is having fun, right? So there's that way to look at it, and that's a natural reaction, especially when reading a story like this in 2019. However, there is another way of looking at it, which is perfectly legit, and that is school libraries are not required to actually have every single book. School libraries, they're operating on a finite amount of space. And especially, not for a public library, but for a school library, you want to utilize that space to the best of your ability, for what's best for your students. And I would be a hypocrite if I sat here and said, by God, Harry Potter is the best young adult or fantasy fiction ever written, because no, it's not. There is a lot better fiction out there. There's a lot better fiction in general. There's a lot better fiction for children. There's a lot better fantasy fiction for children. There is, of course, the tried and true ones, The Lord of the Rings, Chronicles of Narnia, but then there are also, for example, the Dark is Rising series by Susan Cooper, or my personal favorite, The Chronicles of Prydain by Lloyd Alexander. So you could say that as a private school, as a library of a private school with a finite amount of space, a finite number of resources, then you have to make tough decisions. And you have to say, we can't have everything, so we want the best of the best of the best of the best. And so these books have to go so that we can have all of these books. And it also should be noted that a member of the of St. Edward's Library actually said that other libraries in the diocese have Harry Potter. So if kids just really need to read Harry Potter, they can still get it. It's not like, today we banned Harry Potter, tomorrow we're going to burn this pile of books in reminiscence of the Third Reich or anything like that. So that is another legitimate way of looking at it, that with a finite amount of space and resources, you have to make some hard decisions. Now, the best solution, as I was reading this story, I'm just going to throw this out here, gang. The best solution was a middle of the road. If I had been in charge of this decision, what I would have done is I would have had the first 4 books of Harry Potter. The first 4 Harry Potter books, right? To give you an introduction, and then with the fourth book, that's the point where it really starts to get serious, and it ends on a great cliffhanger with Lord Voldemort actually being resurrected through black magic. So if kids really, really wanted to read it, they could, to show, what? There is nothing wrong with it. It is fantasy, it is fiction, it is make-believe, it is not real, but you can see what it is. It's no big deal about it, right? One of the best ways sometimes to take away temptation is to show that there's nothing bad to it, right? But I would have only had the first 4 books. Again, finite amount of space. If they read those, if they really enjoyed them, you could say, hey, you know what? This library has the 5th book, this one over here has the 6th book, and then this one over here has the 7th book. But then, even more than that, you use that as a stepping stone, because the poor fact of the matter is that fewer and fewer kids today actually have access to really good literature, right? Lord of the Rings, Chronicles of Narnia, they are still staples because they just have such a huge fan base and they're so well known internationally. But others, like I was talking about, the Dark is Rising series, the Chronicles of Prydain, the Never Ending Story, the Earthsea books, for example, some of the books by Peter Dickinson, such as The Tears of the Salamander, really good books for children and for adults, because it's just really good fiction, even though it is fantasy. What I would have done with Harry Potter, okay, because Harry Potter is so huge, you use that as a base. Hey, you liked Harry Potter because it's fantasy, because it has elements of, magical beasts and magic and good versus evil. Well, you know what? Here is the Dark is Rising series, right? Which is objectively better than Harry Potter. Here are the Chronicles of Prydain, which are, just much better than Harry Potter, just from a literary standpoint, right? Here are all of these other books. So you take something that's kind of run of the road, right, like Harry Potter, and you use it to build it up. You build up a child's imagination, and you just fill them with good literature. Because again, I love going to the young adult and the children's sections of Barnes & Noble and other bookstores when I go to them, just to see what's being published, what's going on there. And there is such a need for good literature for kids that it's heartbreaking. And this would be a way to actually use something that's middle of the road, that maybe is kind of mundane, but which I would argue is definitely not evil, and use that to your advantage so that then they can be introduced to things that really are objectively great literature, great fantasy, to feed their minds, to feed their souls and their spirits and their hearts, and to set them on fire for fighting the good fight, which is one of the whole points of reading in the first place. But anyway, I have talked way too long as usual, so I'm going to sign off here, gang. Happy Friday, have a great weekend, and I will see you on Tuesday. Ciao.